And I'm mindful of the fact that on the territory on which I am living, there are hundreds of people incarcerated unjustly, and Indigenous people form the vast majority of them. So I did my part today in recognizing truth and reconciliation by writing a letter for his release to Amnesty International. And I invite everybody to do what they can, where they can. We can't fix injustices on a broad scale until all of us act individually where we can. And that's my land acknowledgement for today.
Thank you so much, Mita. I really enjoy when people do land acknowledgements and they're very personal and they tell a personal story. And I was unaware of the significance of what was happening today. And Mita had shared it with me really early this morning. We were messaging, I think about 6 a.m. I believe you said you wrote it as part of your sunrise acknowledgement. And I was like, wow, there's another early bird out there. So that was really lovely. And thank you so much for sharing. And that's one thing about land acknowledgements that I do ask folks, if you do accept the honor and the privilege of giving a land acknowledgement, is really bringing whatever you can to the table that's personal. In my specific to me and in most Indigenous culture, it's very much about intentionality. And where are you coming from, and what are you putting into something, putting in your spirit and your intentions and your wishes for other things, and also learning and understanding the treaties and where you are and why a land acknowledgement is even important, as opposed to just reading what's off of a piece of paper. So again, thank you very much, Mita. It means a lot. And in my language, thank you is Nawa. Thank you very much is Nawagoa. So Nawagoa. So just quickly, you'll notice that we did turn on the recording. So we are recording this session. So if anybody does have a challenge with being recorded, what we understand, if you do choose to log off and choose to listen to the recording later because you're uncomfortable with that, everybody, specifically Missy, who's presenting today, did agree to be recorded. So we will be recording the session and making it available to others. If you'd like to leave your camera on today, we love that. Also understand that can be incredibly exhausting. And as we go through some things, it's sometimes emotional. So understanding as well that you might want to turn your camera off, but we'd love to see your faces. And then also to know that because this is a regular Zoom meeting, you do control the view on your screen. We may make a few changes here and there. And Missy is going to be sharing some slides with you, so they will come up. So if there's anything about your view that isn't to your liking, up in the top right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see the word view. You can click on that and that will give you some options. Also, for those of you who want closed captioning, we have turned it on, and that means that's also available to you if you choose to turn it on. And it is in the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little box that has two C's, the CC in it, and it says show captions, and I'm getting notices now that some folks are turning it on. That's fantastic. So again, if you're having any challenges, throw something in the chat. We'll do our best to help you if we can, but a lot of the Zoom features are held on the end of the users, so you have the options to turn things on and off for yourself. And now, without further ado, I'm hoping that Missy's been able to get logged back in. But today we have the honor and the privilege to welcome Missy Fishman. And she is a two-spirit woman of the Thunderbird clan, raised in Toronto with the Coast Salish roots from Lillooet Valley, BC. She works as a two-spirit coordinator at the Two-Spirited People of the First Nations, where she facilitates educational workshops and collaborates with traditional knowledge carriers and community across the province. It is an honor, as I said, an honor and a privilege to have you joining us today. I've had the privilege of hearing Missy speak a few times, and I'm really excited for all of you and to hear it and to hear any new things and to hear it again. So over to you, Missy, and thank you very much.
Thanks for that great introduction, Angela. Yeah, you can hear the same things over and over again and get different pieces from it each time. So hopefully hopefully that happens for you today. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. So that always takes a moment.
Looks good.
Okay, great. So it's filling the screen.
It
I'm
is,
gonna,
looks fantastic.
okay. And you can still see a full screen now, right? I just changed my view.
We sure can.
Perfect. It's a new world. I love how you explain to everybody how to adjust their cameras on their end. Very thoughtful because we all come to this with different skill levels. So that's very thoughtful.
It's amazing I gave the instructions considering I'm not as skilled as I may have sounded.
Well, maybe that's why you broke it down so well, because that was something you needed to hear. For some people, it's second nature, for Gen Alpha, for example. So, as you said, it's Pride and Indigenous History Month. So, thank you for having me in. It's a great time to have a two-spirited person in because it really connects to both of those subjects. But I do encourage organizations to reach out to us throughout the year. We get a lot of calls in the month of June and the month leading up to it, and then it gets pretty quiet. So one of the things that I say to the people that I can't meet with in the month of June is please try and make connections with the two-spirited community outside of June. I just need to change my view. Somebody once taught me how to, aha, you learn new things every time. There we go. So at the two-spirited people of the First Nations, I connect with community, the Indigenous community, the queer community, and the two-spirit community, mostly. But I also educate folks from all backgrounds about two-spirit people, history of Indigenous people, the Indigenous ways of knowing. I'm a firekeeper at ceremony, which is historically a male role. And water protectors and life bringers have traditionally been the role of women. So as a two-spirited person, I embrace both of those roles in community. I'm also a mechanic and a trained firefighter. I'm passionate about helping people in distress and lifting up those that have been pushed down. I'm of the Thunderbird clan, and bird clans are watchers because we see everything from the bird's eye view. Members of the bird clan are knowledge keepers, and they have responsibilities for teaching others and for expanding the community's knowledge. Birds are seen as the closest animal to the creator, so they're understood to be able to bring wisdom from the sky to the earth and have a strong spiritual connection. I thought I would start off by just doing a little introduction to the medicine wheel. For some of you, this might be very familiar. And in various cultures across the world, there's different variations of the medicine wheel. So your community might have something similar, your teachings. So it's an ancient circular symbol used mostly by Indigenous people in North and South America. And like I said, there's different versions that have been found all around the world. Different nations have different versions of this teaching according to their own personal stories and values and beliefs. So the one that I'm sharing with you is the one that I was taught from my Anishinaabe aunties. And the lessons that this teaching holds is the understanding of how we're connected to the world around us and how that cycle is never ending. When all the elements are there that one person, element, or season, or plant, or animal is not more important than the other, but that we're all interconnected and we rely on each other in some way to have balance and harmony in our lives. You see, in the center of our medicine wheel, it says balance, but a lot of people put me in the center. So when we look at the medicine wheel, it's divided into 4 parts, and each of those parts symbolize one of the 4 cardinal directions. And they have attributes assigned to them that are represented by different colors. And those colors are said to represent all of the nations of the earth. Like the North nations are represented by white, like the snow, and the Eastern nations by yellow, like the sun, and South red for the heat, I suppose. It teaches us that everything's interconnected. Oh, did I miss my slide? Did we lose that? There it is. Sorry about that. I clicked in the wrong place. And it's also, you see the four medicines behind this medicine wheel. So we have four secret medicines in Indigenous teachings, and each one is represented in a different direction as well. And this is the teaching that we use to go through life. So it starts when we're children, and it goes through life with us. It teaches us about the cycle of life, about the stages of our lives. And we enter in the East and we come around, and sometimes we go around the medicine wheel several times to learn our lessons again throughout life. But the one thing that the medicine wheel teaches when you're young to youth is that we use the wheel and we say, you know, if one part of the wheel isn't fed or fueled, then it deflates. And you have this wheel that has a flat spot on it, and it makes everything else a lot harder. So if you're neglecting your physical health, it might not come out in a physical way. It might affect you in an emotional way. So this is about keeping everything in balance. Just a quick lesson about everything. So it's Pride Month. Can't do Pride Month without the acronym. So we've all seen the acronym, and there's a couple missing from this one. I'm wondering if anyone wants to pipe in and tell me one that might be missing from this slide.
Intersex?
Very good. Excellent. Anything else?
Asexual has been added to the chat, Missy.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for reading the chat because I can't have that window open as well. So thank you. That's great. So I will let you read that for a moment. But Indigenous community also has a slide. First Nations, the first one under Indigenous community, is one of three groupings. The other two being Métis and Inuit. And unlike Métis or Inuit, most First Nations people hold reserve lands. And members of a First Nation may live on reserve lands or off of them. And they're often a descendant from the original people in this region. So they have land rights. Inuit people, or Inuktitut, which means for the people, they inhabit the northern regions of Canada. Inuit person is known as Inuk. And as with most Indigenous people across Turtle Island, some move away from their homes and communities, so they're not all in the north. The term Métis is derived from a Latin word meaning mixing, weaving, and it's a collective of people that resulted in unions from Aboriginal and European people. And of course, Indigenous is the collective name for the original people on Turtle Island. So if anyone has any questions at any point, feel free to raise your hand, or if you want to add to the conversation, please do. Two-spirit is an umbrella term that refers specifically to Indigenous people. It's often an identity that Indigenous people say connects them to both the masculine and feminine spirit. They either identify as non-binary or trans or on the LGBTQ spectrum, but not always. Sometimes they're cisgendered, sometimes they're straight, but they are always Indigenous. It's a word that was created and adopted by the community so that we could find a way to connect and we could be better understood by other cultures. It was brought forward in the 90s by an elder, Mira Larmy, and it was an agreed upon term that could encompass all of the different identities that were represented by different languages. So an umbrella term, which means that every two-spirit person that you meet will have a different gender identity and a different sexuality. So always be sure to ask. It's different from the rest of the identities on the acronym because it's the only one that describes a cultural and a spiritual identity and doesn't necessarily refer to a person's gender identity or their sexuality. So, any questions? Great, we'll move on then. Intersectionality. This refers to the interconnected nature of multiple identities like race, gender, sexuality, class, ability. and so many more. It's looking at how those intersect and they create a unique experience for each of us. And that is a unique experience of oppression or of privilege. The two-spirit and most Indigenous identities now are intersectional. It's just the nature of the identity. The only thing, like I said, that two-spirit people have in common is that they're Indigenous. And how they fit into that LGBTQIA spectrum is unique to each person. For example, a two-spirit person who is also intellectually challenged may face more discrimination or oppression than a two-spirit person that's neurotypical. And similarly, a two-spirit person who identifies as cisgendered will face different challenges than one that's trans or non-binary. I like this image. It really has a lot to say. It's the Wheel of Power and Privilege. It was created by Sylvia Duckworth, and it demonstrates how various parts of our identities lead to advantage or disadvantage, and how some of those things will change over our lifetimes, and some are permanent parts of our identity. It's an interesting activity. Just maybe we could all just take a moment and examine our own place of privilege on the wheel, or lack thereof, and see how that makes us feel. So systemic racism, which is also known as institutional racism, it refers to a way that whiteness and white superiority have become embedded in the policies and the processes of an institution. And that results in a system that advantages white people and disadvantages racialized people. In Canada, in a settler state like Canada, systemic racism is rooted in just about every single one of our systems. And that means that systemically, we have put into place or designed the system to benefit white colonists while disadvantaging Indigenous populations that have lived here prior to colonization. In order to make changes to this unfair system, we need to be aware of the areas where we have power in the dynamic. It's always the people that are most impacted by oppression that will take on the burden of change, while those with the power feel like contributing to the fight and do in many ways. But it's human nature for us to embrace the fact that we deserve to be on top or respected, autonomous. And so we don't necessarily see it as privilege. We accept that we have that position of power, but really it's the people in the position of power recognizing that we have that power that can start to change the system. This is just a did you know slide. That we're the fourth largest resource of renewable fresh water in the world, and we still have 27 First Nations that have unsafe drinking water. And we've been fighting for this for decades. This is just incredible. And despite making up only 4% of the population, that the children in care and in foster systems that are Indigenous are over 30%. They're shocking statistics. If there's anything in the chat, Angela, I don't know if you you can feel free to pipe in.
Sure. No, there's a couple comments that are just chatter, but nothing. And I had just said that the statistics are just unbelievable. And now some folks are commenting on that.
Yeah. Oops, wrong way. Let's see if I can get us back there. Oh, I can. Technology. Yeah, shocking. So some people don't know about residential schools. I'm always shocked because it's such a huge part of our Canadian history, but I'm not sure at what point it changed. Um, but it was fairly recently that residential school, the history of it in Canada was added to our curriculum. So depending on what age you are in this space, you may or may not have learned about this if you were raised in Canada. Um, and if you are new to Canada, I almost feel like you have a better chance of learning because I'm pretty sure that people who come to Canada have a better idea of our Canadian history than some of the people that live here. So residential schools, which operated here from the late 19th century until 1996, were a key tool in colonial assimilation. Thousands of Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their family and community and placed in these schools where they were subjected to abuse and neglect and cultural genocide. And to further the trauma, this part of the Canadian history has been deliberately omitted. So this is something I think we all need to see and know about. Because many Two-Spirit kids that were in these institutions faced particularly harsh treatment because they were run by the church. So their gender identities were often seen as a threat to those colonial norms, and they were subjected to abuse and physical efforts to suppress their identities. The ways of understanding that their parents had, the ways of knowing and traditional practices around gender and sexuality were all but lost, and their place in society and communities was brutally stripped from them. So we talk about colonization a lot, especially with the TRC's calls to actions. And we talk about it like it was something that happened, but the impacts of it are still happening in all of the ways that we've talked about so far, the systemic racism. So cultural suppression was the goal of the Canadian government, and they recognized that that would lead to a loss of cultural identity, and it would disrupt the social structures of Indigenous communities. In many Indigenous communities prior to colonization, gender was often understood as a spectrum, and the roles or identities of individuals were diverse and they were fluid. But colonizers, usually motivated by religious beliefs, um, often thinking that they were helping, um, imposed their rigid binary norms. And with those distinct roles and expectations, it altered the sanctity of the understanding of gender in the Indigenous communities. This binary ideology is perpetuated now, and it's in our community. And non-gender conforming Two-Spirit people are now also not always welcomed in our cultural community practices because there's been this thread that's been woven through colonization, through that generation that was raised in the church with these belief systems without the guidance of their families that lost their identity and lost the understanding and the cultural teachings around Two-Spirit people and how we are all gifts to our community, and instead practice this very strict gender-based practice, isolating and ostracizing Two-Spirit people from the community. So it's been a return to the community in the last decade for Two-Spirit people. And organizations like ours support that return. It's a lot of Two-Spirit people who come to us have never had the opportunity to practice some of their traditional practices. And so the first time they get to play a hand drum or have a smudge or meet with an elder is through our organization, where we say to them, like, you're important, you're a gift, and these teachings are yours to have.
And Missy, in the chat, we've got somebody commenting on Indigenous children and probably quite likely a number of Two-Spirited who would have been sold or shipped out of Canada or outside of their communities and raised in homes outside of the residential schools, but just given to other homes and other cultures to be raised completely removed from that. And want to acknowledge that in the chat and how
Yeah.
traumatic that is for people to find their culture after.
That's right. That I think is ranked under the 60s scoop, where they
Yeah.
were forcibly removing Indigenous children from their home and placing them in non-Indigenous families with the hopes of removing any Indigenous practices and knowledge from them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
the goal was cultural suppression.
Yeah. The other thing I learned from another speaker last year was, as Canadians, we often think of our country as, we're the peacemakers, and we've often thought of we've looked to other nations as being much more violent and doing things wrong. And I learned that because of I'm doing air quotes for anybody who's not looking at me, the quote unquote success of our residential schools in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the apartheid movement in Africa was based off of the success of our
Mm-hmm.
residential schools, as well as a lot of the work that was done in the US
Mm-hmm.
suppressing Indigenous populations. It came after ours. So we really had this horrible influence around the world because of the negative success of our residential school system. So thank you again for sharing that.
Thank you for adding. I love a good conversation. That's the that's the one thing we were lacking the last time, but I do feel a bit more circular somehow in this Zoom chat with everybody. Well, circles will come up a lot. We started with a circle. With interconnectedness, the circle is definitely a symbol that represents how we are all connected. So it comes up again and again. But a perfect way, an example of how colonization devalued the place of Indigenous women is through the development of the Indian Act in 1876, which explicitly defined Indian status through the patrilineal descent and limited political and property rights exclusively to men. For much of its history, the Indian Act contained provisions that stripped Indigenous women of their Indian status if they married a non-Indigenous man, while Indigenous men who married non-Indigenous women could maintain their status and pass it on to their children. This created a system of unequal treatment based on gender, perpetuating patriarchal norms and undermining the rights and identities of Indigenous women. Historically, women in Indigenous communities held land rights. So, with the development of the Indian Act, they lost those land rights. And as the primary caregiver of the family, in many cases, those land rights were to protect the primary caregiver so that the family would always have somewhere to live, the children would have somewhere to grow up, where men were a bit more nomadic. But this changed everything. And by devaluing women and taking away their rights, it stripped them of the power that they had, made them very vulnerable, which has led to a situation of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls in Canada. So when we see our Indigenous community today, we see underemployment, we see addiction issues, we see broken families, homelessness, and high levels of poverty in the Indigenous community. And the question is then, is this an inherent trait of Indigenous people? It's not. And some people believe it is because they don't understand the history and how we got here. It's not. This is part of the cycle of trauma and the ongoing impact of systemic discrimination that started with that attempt of cultural erasure. That started with abuse and genocide, otherwise known as colonization. It's a nice little package word that we put it into, but when you break it down, it's horrifying. The negative effects of that violence and systemic oppression reach far beyond the individual who directly experienced it. Violence can have long-lasting effects, negative effects on your health, on social and economic effects that can span generations, that can lead to cycles of violence and abuse within families and sometimes within whole communities. I feel like I'm glowing. The sun has really kicked in. It's lovely. It's quite lovely. So we're all impacted by this systemic oppression. because we're all interconnected. It's that idea that we were talking about earlier on, that if you don't fuel one part of that medicine wheel, you're going to have a flat spot in the movement. And if you think of society as the wheel that's moving, and we're negatively impacting a large portion of our population, that's only going to impact the forward motion for everybody. When we look at the creation story, well, some of the creation stories, we start with the seeds of the earth and how life first began, and how the animals started and the messages that they carried from Creator, and the plants and their messages that they carried, and the berries, and how all of the life on earth supported one another, that they're all interconnected. When the bees die, we lose plants. When we can't pollinate, we lose food. So we see this interconnected nature. And in the creation story, eventually comes humans. And humans are the only part in the creation story that I was given that can be taken out and not impact the future of the rest of creation, that have no negative impacts at all. In fact, humans being added to the earth meant that we were burdening the earth. So our direct instructions were to care for it, to care for Mother Earth as she supports all life. So why do non-Indigenous Canadians need to learn about our Indigenous history and about Two-Spirit people? Because for many Canadians, the history of Indigenous people in Canada was, until recently, unknown. Generations of Canadians have gone through their lives without knowing about residential schools, the historic and ongoing impact of the Indian Act, and the significance of treaties that were all treaty people, or the contributions of Indigenous people to the mosaic that is Canada. Non-Indigenous Canadians need to understand why Indigenous people were offended when Canada chose to have an expansive celebration that marked 150 years since Confederation. Indigenous people have been here much longer than 150 years, and that timestamp didn't acknowledge or respect their relationship with this land that extends back tens of thousands of years. I say that to remind you, when Indigenous Month wraps up and we celebrate Canada Day, right at the end of Indigenous History Month, to make note mentally, maybe share with somebody else this understanding that you've had of what it means to celebrate Canada Day. What are we celebrating? And what is the history of Canada? I love this quote. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. In Indigenous teachings, we were taught to think 7 generations ahead, that the impact that you have today should be done with the intention of supporting the generations to come. And that will teach all of us how to take care of the earth that we live on. Because First Nations, Indigenous people have had an intricate, respectful, spiritual, and protective tie to the land. The nature of this tie isn't one of ownership, but of stewardship. And the teaching that we were given is that we were bestowed with the responsibility of the land and the sea and the sky and of all creatures that inhabit the land. The responsibility is intrinsically tied to the spirits of all aspects of our earth. Traditional knowledge and medicines and language and cultural practices and oral traditions passed down for a millennia are all teachings of interconnectedness to this land, that circle. And if that connection, that umbilical cord, is severed, then the spiritual well-being of our Indigenous people is at stake. So I love this quote.
We have a beautiful comment in the chat, Missy, from Opal. And Opal says, we are taught to live with gratitude, to be land stewards, water protectors. Take some, leave some, share some. For example, it's how we harvest our medicines and our food. So thank you for sharing that, Opal.
That's right. That's right, Opal. That we take only a little bit. We never take too much to hurt the plant, but we always give back. And tobacco is a way that we give back. It's symbolic that we are always giving something, and it's the most sacred of all of our medicines. So when we pick cedar, when we pick our medicines, when we take from the earth, or when we call out to Mother Earth for guidance or support, we put tobacco down as a symbol that we are giving back. So I thought I'd have a little trivia, because who doesn't love a little trivia? So we have, oh, and well, what can you win if you win the trivia? Let's put a prize in there. I've got something. Okay, here's our prize. It's a mouse pad. It's glowing in the sunlight. There you go. It's
Wow, we
tie-dye.
love that. We love a guest speaker that brings prizes.
All right, we got prizes for winners, maybe multiple. But so how are we going to do this? Well, the first person who puts their hand up, I would love for them to answer it, unmute to answer it. But if you're not comfortable, you can put it in the chat. But
Oh, I
maybe
love that. Unmute and yell it out.
Okay. All right. Let's unmute and yell it out. I'm into that. I would love to hear from some of you. So, okay, let's start with history. What year was the last residential school closed in Canada?
1996.
Ooh, that was quick. Who is
Somebody
that?
was really fast.
Oh, that was me, Grayson Evans.
Grayson Evans, 1996 was Grayson Evans' answer.
Okay, that's correct.
Good job, Grayson. Opal put it
Thanks.
in the chat, but you were just a little too the typing's a little slower than the unmute and yell it out.
And any idea where that was in Canada?
Oh God, wasn't it in Ontario? Oh no, Jesse says Sask.
Saskatchewan, yeah. It was Gordon Reserve Indian Residential School in Saskatchewan. It was closed and demolished in 1996. Good job. All right. Question number 2. Identity. What is the one thing that all Two-Spirit people have in common?
Being
They're
Indigenous.
Oh, that was a tie. Who do we got?
Yeah, I didn't. It was Grayson and someone else. Who else yelled it out?
Danielle.
Danielle. I think it was a tie right across the finish there.
Okay. Okay. Where are we now? Cultural understandings. Okay. Who can name the 4 sacred medicines?
Tobacco, sage, cedar, and sweetgrass.
I feel like Grayson's just kicking butt. Is that Grayson again?
Yes, that
Yeah,
was Grayson.
sorry. I come to
Grayson's
win.
going for
You come to
sweeps.
win. Absolutely. Okay. Query. What does the acronym 2S LGBTQQIA+ stand for?
Lesbian, gay, trans, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, intersex, asexual,
And there's 2 Q's.
queer, and questioning.
Yeah, excellent job. Very good.
Great
Who was
job. That's Kelly, right?
Yes, it is. You got that right.
Awesome.
that? Okay.
Sorry,
We have a
didn't-
couple. That's
sorry,
okay.
didn't- But I was thinking, oh God, I gotta think fast before anyone else gets it. Bam, I got it.
Okay, 2 bonus questions. The first one is, what year did Stonewall happen?
1969.
Kelly,
Yes, 1969.
you got it. Excellent. Good job.
Great job.
Okay, and in the Indigenous calendar, we are lunar calendar. How many months are there?
13.
13. Is that Grayson? For the
Yes, it
win?
was.
Okay, amazing.
Grayson sounds a little subdued now.
Feel a little guilty.
Don't at all. Opal's doing a
Amazing.
great job too. Unfortunately, with the typing in the chat, it's coming in just a little bit after the shout out. But Opal's doing a great job.
Opal, okay, special shout out to Opal as well. Well, I mean, I only had a few questions for you. You did great. I will, I'll get your prizes to Angela. That was
Excellent.
fun. Yeah.
That was great. Grayson for the win. Lots of
Yeah.
applause for Grayson.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yay.
And thank you, everybody. And Opal, again, I'm sorry your audio isn't working, but you put in a noble effort as well. You type very fast.
So if anyone is interested in connecting with the Two-Spirited people, we offer many cultural services, activities, and engagement with the community. We just had a Two-Spirit powwow, which hopefully some of you were able to come out to. It was amazing. People from all across Ontario came. We had communities, because there's not a lot of Two-Spirit supports outside of Toronto. We had communities that rented buses and brought youth and community members in from Manitoulin Island, from Thunder Bay, from North Bay. It was incredible, truly incredible. And we had 115 regalia dressed dancers out there. So showing off their regalia and their traditions and the teachings. And it was really a really heartwarming event, very queer, very Indigenous, everything that Two-Spirit embodies. So please feel free you can scan the QR code or just take a photo and connect with us anytime. I just wanted to thank you all for listening to what I had to say, for sharing this space, for joining the participating in this discussion about, because we're not done yet. Hopefully we'll be able to all see each other in a moment, but to participate in this discussion, engaging in a reconciliation through this conversation. And I always like to leave with a bit of a challenge to share what you've learned, to talk about it, to spread the word, because there's a lot of miseducation about our Indigenous communities that we need to correct. And we need to check our privilege and our power where we can. So yeah, miigwech, big miigwech. I would smudge all of you if we were in the same room. But instead, I will end my share and hopefully we can have a bit of a discussion now.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Missy. This has been, as you said, you learn something new every time, and I've loved the interaction in the chat. And we do have a question in the chat from Jesse. Lots of thanks for everybody, but Jesse's asked if your services are available virtually to 2S individuals residing outside of the GTA. I jumped in the chat and put your email address in, but maybe you'd like to expand on that.
Yeah. Absolutely. We're actually working on expanding our organization. We've become provincially mandated as of last year. So we're working on visiting all of the communities. I was actually part of the team that had the pleasure of going to various communities in Ontario and meeting with knowledge carriers and community members and finding out what it was that they were looking for in their community and what they were hoping, how they were hoping to find those supports. And now we've applied for some grant money so that we can actually open some office spaces, some spaces where cultural practices can happen for Two-Spirit people. So absolutely, we connect with people on Zoom, and we have different events where we come throughout Ontario. So it's still within our province, but our reach is getting bigger, and we have lots of staff that are happy to connect with people from afar as well as our elders, which is great.
That's fantastic. And I will, as I hear you said you've done some grant proposals and haven't heard back yet. I'll remember to throw down some tobacco for you, and in hopes that those proposals come through. They're always a nail biter to get them in, and you hope for it. Opal has written in the chat that she attends. She says, "I go to 2S at 2126 Danforth." I don't know what that is. But that must be a local community group in Toronto that
That's us. That's us.
Oh,
We're the Two Spirited People.
perfect. That's your actual
2126.
address.
Yeah, we have two offices. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Opal says it's a small space with lots of activity. So you've got a great cheerleader in the chat. So that's absolutely amazing. And Kelly, you're actually sending direct messages just to me. So if you want them to be to everybody, if you want to click on the chat and change it to everyone. And Kelly has been sending lots of thanks. She's also shared her email address that she'd love to be in touch with you. And I'll share that with you later, Missy, if you want to reach out to Kelly. And she just said the meeting is amazing and she's loved it so much. And she wanted to thank everybody so much for this. So again, Kelly, if you want that to be in for everybody, change from direct message to everyone, and everyone will see your chat. Any other questions or comments?
I would love to make another comment about our office space, that we do support Two-Spirit people, but we support Two-Spirit people, their family, their loved ones, their parents, all generational. Like, we span the generations. In fact, we have a multi-generational program coordinator who connects our elders with our youth and tries to bring them in for cultural programming, because in traditional ways, that was how we always were in our communities. So yes, people are welcome to join. Absolutely. You don't have to be Two-Spirit to learn more. We also offer harm reduction and mental health crisis supports, as well as we do outreach. So our organization is very fulsome, and it's driven by the community. So if the community has needs, we listen and try to meet those needs.
Great. That's great. Thank you. And I will admit that I didn't know about your organization until it was earlier in the year, maybe even before, maybe in last year when I got some information from the Chiefs of Ontario, and that's when it was advertising that Missy was going to be speaking, and I signed up right away, and I was blown away. I learned so much in one session, and I think I've been hot on emailing you, Missy, for a variety of things since then. So that's how you make your forever friend. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I look forward to going for coffee after the slew of talks are over.
Absolutely. It's definitely a busy month, and a reminder to all of us as well that to remember that it isn't just during the month of June. See, I've lost a whole month. But again, a reminder that it is an opportunity to engage in activities all year round. And, there's always amazing things. I'm right now up just outside of Midland. And it's a completely different area. I've been over to the Rama Reserve. And in August, I usually go to the powwow that's there, and a great opportunity for me to engage in with a different nation, people that I don't know. They're not my family. It's not where I'm from, but I love learning about their traditions and different things that are going on in this area as well. And as I said this morning, I went and had a nice walk in the marsh early this morning, the Y Marsh in this area. It's right next to St. Marie among the Hurons, which has been working really, really hard with a number of their activities around reconnecting with Indigenous culture here, as well as correcting some of the wrongs of the past, and probably editing the revisionist history that was probably written for a while. But it's always interesting, again, even in my own Indigenous background, to look at other people's cultural places and spaces, and be open to listening and learning. We've got a couple of other comments here. One specifically, Amita, thank you for asking that. The question is around, what can allies do to support the work? A lot of people, even with our own Indigenous talking circle at Community Living Toronto, don't have an Indigenous culture or background or family member, but are just wanting to be more supportive, especially with learning what they've been learning in the past number of years around the residential schools and truth and reconciliation. So is there anything, Missy, that you recommend that folks can do?
Yeah, I feel like engaging in meaningful conversations has been really important. It's like I said before, there's a lot of our Canadian history that is just lost, and people don't fully understand how our Indigenous community has gotten to the place where it is now. And I think supporting the community is another way. So within the community, we have a lot of divide as well. But outside of the community, people are attempting to meet the calls of the TRC through meaningful ways like land acknowledgements. And I liked how at the beginning you explained that, you can make the land acknowledgement really personal. And I think that's a great opportunity to add in something you understand about Indigenous culture, or to find a meaningful way to connect with the Indigenous teachings that you've been given. Is in those land acknowledgements, rather than reading just the territory that we're on, the same land acknowledgement that we're all very aware of. But to talk about what this land means to you, or where your family came from, I always encourage people to learn Indigenous teachings. They are called Anishinaabe teachings, and the word Anishinaabe means human. And they were never intended to be teachings that Indigenous people held and protected and kept, because we were afraid that people would try to culturally appropriate. The intention was that we were given these teachings so that we could all learn from one another, and we could find a way to support each other. So I think bringing attention to intention as well. Yeah, and because like the work we're doing here, this is very meaningful, very purposeful, and we're just here meeting for an hour over your lunch times. But I know that some of what's said can really impact you, just in reflecting in your own life about the ways that you feel privileged or disadvantaged, and connecting with other people that feel that way. It can be powerful.
Absolutely. I had somebody last week, we had a short session at our 20 Spadina office where I talked about the sacred medicines, and we made some tobacco ties together, and it was a really lovely, lovely time. And in that conversation, I had the same question, Nita, from someone else that said, I'm not Indigenous, but I want to learn more, but I don't know where I'm welcome. And at that time I said, well, first of all, you should be welcome everywhere. But I understand the intimidation, the fear that you're going to do something wrong. And I love that Missy was emphasizing intention. And I always say to everybody, we're going to step in it. We're going to step in it every day, all the time. I step in it all the time. But if your intention is good and you're coming from a good place, there's a lot of grace in that. There's a lot of understanding, and an opportunity to go to a powwow. You're always welcome at a powwow. Go and observe, be respectful, and enjoy the food, enjoy the music, enjoy the dancing and the regalia, support the local artists, buy some amazing things from the local artists, ask those artists what their inspiration is. Why are they making these things? And what are you going to do with the thing that you purchase from them afterwards? So it's amazing to support them, and really be respectful of the culture and the privilege that you have to go. On June 21st, for those who are in Toronto, there we go, June 15th, NAMA Res is having a powwow at Fort York, and powwows are usually either free for a very minimal amount of money. Kelly, I see your question about prizes. Don't worry, I'll get to you after the call. Don't worry about that. But on the 21st, it is Indigenous Peoples Day. And a few years ago, when we first created the Indigenous Talking Circle at Community Living Toronto on Indigenous Peoples Day, we actually hosted sessions, and we had a variety of different talks, and we had some lunchtime activities. And I will say that for those of us who do have an Indigenous background, it was an exhausting day. It was both exhausting, and we felt like we'd missed out on some of our own things. So we don't host things on the 21st. And instead, we encourage folks to participate in your community, because that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be out with our families and friends and loved ones, and doing great things in the community. And for those who are in Toronto, Harbourfront Centre has an incredible amount of activities that are done primarily by the Native Centre. But whatever community you're dialing in from right now, I encourage you to reach out. There's probably something going on in your community. And they're always quite lovely. There's opportunities to engage in some of the crafts and handiwork. You can learn about drumming. You can listen. You can see and ask questions about people's regalia, and just some of the processions and rituals that will be carried out. If you go really early, there's often a sunrise ceremony. Again, they're quite beautiful, and opportunity for you all. And eat fry bread, yes, or the Indian tacos, which I hadn't even had until last summer. I was like, what are you talking about, Indian taco? And I went to the Ram and Powwow, and it was absolutely incredible. So if you haven't had one, go. They make them everywhere from vegan, vegetarian, to game meats, to just good old ground beef or chicken and fish. There's all kinds, but great way to try some of the different foods and culture, experience the different cultures. So always very, very welcome. But anyone else have any questions or commentary? I just totally hijacked the conversation there for a few minutes.
I just posted in the chat my work Facebook.
Great. Thank
Hopefully
you.
that takes you there. And in my postings, there was a list of powwows coming up this summer. So feel free to peruse those, see if there's any in your area. I love that you suggested buying Indigenous beading and like authentic goods from Indigenous artists. I always bring cash to powwows, although now everybody taps. It's my favorite place to shop.
I bought these
Absolutely.
at the Two Spirit Powwow.
Oh, beautiful.
And there's sparkly glitter stuff behind it.
Yeah. The one thing that I love when you buy Indigenous products is that you know that I'm a vegetarian and I'm very sensitive to animals, and I know that their spirit has been put tobacco down for it, and that they've been taken care of in a good way, where all of the animal is used and all of the pieces have gone into teachings and to medicine. So that makes me feel better as well when I buy leathers and porcupine quills.
Absolutely.
Feathers.
And it's such a great time to engage with the artists too, and ask their story. I've not been to a market where there's been Indigenous artists who don't just light up to tell you their story and how they got into beading and who taught them and what was the first thing they ever made. It's often an auntie that they've learned over the years, and there's often a very sweet and funny story about the first thing that they would have made. It's typically quite terrible, but it's a very endearing story that they'll tell, or that they're with their aunties and they insist on making Peppa Pig or Winnie the Pooh or something like that. And there's a little bit of a bite your cheek for the aunties, but they're getting them into the beading or the caribou tufting or whatever it is, and they're quite lovely stories to hear. And oftentimes when I've found that when artisans are selling the things that they're making, they'll often have a very precious piece that somebody's made for them that they'll be wearing or they have with them. And there's often a really lovely story if you take the time to chat with them and ask questions. And everything that I've ever bought, I have a great story story behind it. And the other thing is that if you buy things from someone Indigenous, show it. Don't hide it. Don't put it in a drawer. These are meant to be shown and talked about. Share the
Yes.
stories.
Yes, it's not appropriation to wear authentic Indigenous goods, for sure.
Exactly. And I often say that Indigenous artwork is one of the most appropriated cultures in the world, and that, you know, you can buy a dream catcher at Dollarama, which makes me ragey. But you know, go and buy a dream catcher from an artist who's made one and has poured their intention and their wishes and all that great stuff into it, and hang it with pride in your home, and then tell the story of why you have it and how you came upon it and what your decision was. And often artists will even ask you this. They'll say, why, what are you going to do with this, or why, especially if you engage with them. It could be quite a lovely experience if you've not done it before. I know people are very intimidated by it, but I've had great experiences.
And that first piece, often people who they make their first piece, it's that they're taught that that's a gift. Like they have to give that first piece away.
Yes.
It's not meant for you.
Yes. And like I said, if you talk to some folks, you get some great stories. I've heard some of the older artisans talk about the first piece they've ever made, and they say, I gave it to an auntie and she treasures it to this day, but boy, oh boy, was it not good.
Yeah.
But the story's beautiful, right? They're like,
Yeah.
I sewed it backwards and upside down, and and as Kelly made a good point, there are lots of Indigenous artists that are on places like Etsy now. You know, again, much like doing a land acknowledgement, all that I would suggest is really do your research, ask some questions, and really do make sure that you're supporting somebody who is an Indigenous as best you can. Any other questions or comments from folks? I think that may be getting close to wrap it up. We're getting some thank yous. Thank you, Danielle, for your comment in the chat. I've learned a lot as well. I appreciate everybody here who's come on and joined us. We don't have any, we have one more session scheduled for Indigenous History Month. And that is actually with a former employee of Community Living Toronto, Joel Jameson, who moved back to his hometown and is working at Community Living Six Nations. And he also has a sister with an intellectual disability. So we're going to have a great session with him later this month. I think it's on the 18th. If you want more information, just drop myself or Artem or Carla an email, and we'll make sure you have the email about that. And like we said, we try to offer lots of different sessions during this month so that people are getting a broad stroke of information. And as I said, this was a joint effort with our Pride Collective here at Community Living Toronto, and we wanted to really emphasize the intersectionality and give some opportunity for space for both of us in the same place in the month of June, and then hopefully all year round. So, and as I said in my language, again, Mohawk, it is Nawa or Nawagoa. Nawagoa is the more formal thank you very much, a little more emphasis. So Missy, to you, Nawagoa, really appreciate you doing this for us. It's been a pleasure. And I really look forward to that coffee where we're not having to present, and we could actually just chit chat and get to know each other even better. And Nawa to everyone else. And Missy, if you want to say anything else, that would be great.
Yeah, a big chimigwech. That's thank you very much. Todaraba, Hebrew, thank you very much. Sign language, thank you very much. So good to see all of you. So glad that you came. So glad that I was here to participate one more time with Community Living. If you want to reach out, you can get my email or connect with me through Facebook. So I hope to hear from some of you again and do more of these collaborations together.
Wonderful. And we will promise not to only do them in June. That's going to be our commitment at Community Living Toronto.
I love it. Love that.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. And Carla's thrown in the chat the registration for the June 18th session. If anybody wants to grab that, that would be great. And I look forward to seeing you then. Otherwise, again, Nawa, have a lovely day and go and enjoy some sunshine.
Yes. Enjoy the sun.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.